Hi, and welcome to What the Field, a space where the environment matters. I am Roman.
And I'm Grace.
And today we're joined by Guy Singh-Watson, founder of Riverford Organic Farmers. Thank you, Guy, for being with us today. We're honoured to have you.
My pleasure.
So, Guy, maybe you could start telling us a bit about yourself. Who are you? What led you here? A bit about Riverford.
Okay, I'm 61. I'm a farmer's son. My dad was mainly a dairy farmer. It was a tenanted farm where it was rented from the Church of England, and he was a mixed farm. So he kept cows and sheep and pigs and chickens and grew grain, and started farming just after the war in 1951. I'm the last of 5 children. I always wanted to be a farmer. I love being outside. Probably just as significantly, my mother was actually just a fantastic cook, and she drew her inspiration from what grew on the farm. And, she very unfashionably at that time in England, when everyone was getting into processed food, she made her own butter and bread and hams and sausages, all those things you do so well in Spain, and grew our own garden, which is where I started learning about growing vegetables, and that's what we ate. And we ate every day, with the other people who worked on the farm, big long table, and she cooked these fantastic lunches. And I think my ideas around farming and food and sharing food and the pleasure it can bring and its ability to bring people together were formed quite early. And actually, I think most people's values are laid down pretty early. So that's where it all started. As I say, I always wanted to be a farmer. I went to the local school, went off to university, got my agricultural degree, and came back to the farm. And as I say, there were 5 of us, but the next oldest brother from me also came back to the farm at the same time, and we didn't really get on very well. So after a couple of years, I left. And I went, it was the 80s. I went and got myself a snappy suit, and I had a first-class degree from Oxford, which allowed me to get a job in the city. And I ended up as a management consultant for 2 years. Mm-hmm. Working for industrial companies, really boring projects on the whole. But it did teach me about how international markets work, and and how brutal they can be, actually. And being a commodity producer is a pretty miserable place to be, probably especially in farming, where you're going to be a small scale commodity producer on the whole. And so after 2 years, I'd had enough of being a management consultant. And I realized I was unemployable, and so I needed to start my own business. I wanted it to be outside, something to do with food and farming, and I wanted to be in control of my own destiny, to have a direct link with my customers, to do my own sales, just as you guys are doing, because otherwise, you get screwed by the supermarkets. Though the people who control the market are always the people who make the money. That's just the brutal truth of it. And anyone who thinks that they can run a good business by being good at what they do, and that surely, you'll get paid an honest price, and surely you'll be able to run a decent business on that basis. It's just not. There's always someone who can produce it cheaper than you, especially when we're talking globally today. So I feel very strongly that I wanted to be in control of my own sort of destiny, which meant doing my own marketing, knowing my own customers, and doing my own delivery. And so that's the way the business developed. We are probably today, I'm only growing, Riverford grows maybe 15% of what we sell. We have a cooperative of growers that I helped to establish in the 90s.
Wow, it's fascinating, because you're actually one of the pioneers in the direct-to-consumer, more of at a national scale, really, because you started in the 90s. No, there was no internet around, I presume.
No, there was no internet. Credit cards, people had credit cards, but it wasn't a common sort of payment. So people rang up, or sometimes they even sent letters.
Yeah,
people gave us checks. Occasionally, we even saw cash.
And at the very beginning and still today, you were seen as a very local player, right? Because you were selling to your neighbours. We were just chatting earlier before that you started delivering yourself, right?
Yeah, I did all the deliveries myself for the first few years. It did start off with friends and relatives and probably everything within 20 miles. Yeah. And it just grew and grew and grew. And I just seemed to have I really needed to prove myself, I think. The truth of it, I can realise looking back now that I've buried the old bugger, that I had to prove myself to my dad. So that was what it was all about, and that's why.
Don't we all?
We've all been there, I think, at some point.
It's a very common tale. Especially, I mean, most entrepreneurs, in my observation, the ones I've met are driven by a desire to prove themselves to someone, normally their father. It's such a common tale, and sadly, it often leads to some really bad behaviour. I'm afraid that what should be a positive thing ends up being a negative thing, and people end up doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't, walking over people in a way that they shouldn't, and and I can look back on my early years and see a few examples of that myself.
I love how this conversation took a Freudian twist.
We got away from vegetables.
But something that is really on the news lately is local agriculture. And we wanted to ask you, what does local farming, local agriculture mean to you? Because you'd ask someone somewhere.
People would say it's food produced within, 50 miles or 100 miles, 150 kilometers or something. But actually, I don't. That, though obviously there is a geographical element, I think local means food that you feel some sort of connection to, and with that connection normally comes trust. So that could be, food from quite a long way away. So I think there are two elements to the argument for local. One is cultural and social, and one is environmental. And the environmental argument for local food is not very strong. It's often better to produce food, to grow plants in a soil and a climate where the plant's happy, where you require less inputs, you don't require polytunnels or glass houses, you don't require heat, you don't require supplementary lighting, and you probably could require a lot less fertilizer and pesticide interventions if the plant is growing where it's happy. And so trying to grow plants out of their natural season, out of their natural climate, often ends up not being the right thing to do environmentally. It's 10 times more efficient in terms of carbon to grow a pepper in Andalusia than it is to grow it in the UK. That is the brutal truth of it. I mean, because in the UK it's typically, if you're planting them in January and it's 3 degrees outside, the greenhouse needs to be heated to 20 degrees. And it just consumes a prodigious amount of energy. It's an environmental disaster. It's probably even more insane than putting something on an aeroplane. But a few people, I mean, we actually did a study with a local university and roughly with tomatoes, it was about 5 times worse. Peppers, it was about 10 times worse. But doesn't really seem to have moved the argument very much.
And do you think these people that are raising the issue about eating locally will be really willing to eat locally if they knew what it meant, if they knew what, like, the very narrow variety of things they could be eating?
One word answer to that is no. I mean, no, absolutely not. People are total hypocrites. And I am as well. But I mean, we have our customers who absolutely, say, God, we only want to buy UK produce in season and whatever. And you go around and see them and you open their fridge and it's just rammed full of, tomatoes in January and strawberries in February, or sometimes flown in from around the world. People are complete hypocrites. Anyway, it's a bit annoying, but it's just the world we live in. People are incredibly hypocritical around what they eat. Maybe that's changing a little bit, especially with the next generation. I think, the rise of plant-based eating and veganism and so on is an example of people, I mean, partly for their own health, but also for the planet, of wanting to eat a more sustainable diet. So I think things are changing a bit, yeah. but not much in my generation.
Another topic that it's lately very discussed and very demonized, it's plastics. I would love to hear your point of view on, for listeners, on what kind of packaging should we pursue, because we are plastics is always like we hear everyone saying plastic free, but plastic sometimes can be a really good friend to avoid, for example, food waste. What kind of packaging should we be moving towards?
I don't really know what I think about this, if I'm honest. I don't have a black and white view. I mean, if you look at it in terms of measurable impact on our environment, there are, pretty strong arguments for continuing to use plastic in a sensible way, and possibly even continuing to use, conventional oil-based plastics. If we had sensible policies around their whole life cycle and what we did at the end of their life cycle. So, I mean, my personal view is that while we are still burning oil and gas, in our cars and so on, and to heat and to generate electricity, which we still are, why not make a plastic bag, have it serve a function, get your spinach or lettuce to you in a good condition, and at the end of its life, instead of incinerating and burning oil to generate electricity, just burn the plastic bag, and that seems a logical, sensible thing to do. But it's completely unacceptable to most people, and certainly in the UK, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to recycle, to gather up waste and separate it in a sensible way. So, I mean, that's one side of the argument. The other side of it is that, we just shouldn't be treating our planet like a rubbish tip. And if we don't have a good way to deal with something at the end of its life, we shouldn't use it. I mean, that's the kind of absolutist sort of argument. And so we shouldn't be using plastics in the way that we do. And that would mean that the food chain will not work as we have it, and probably your business wouldn't work, and my business wouldn't work, and supermarkets wouldn't work, and maybe they shouldn't work. I mean, maybe there is something fundamentally wrong, that we're eating food from so far away that it requires this sort of plastic packaging. But I mean, my God, that's what I really feel. I would love to live in a world where we didn't have such, long supply chains, and we did, appreciate the food that grew around us and felt a connection with it. But that's just not, that's not going to happen in my lifetime. I mean, that's the world I'd like to live in. But the question is, how do we get there? And there's not an obvious route for how you do get there. So, in the meantime, I guess we'll carry on using plastic and just try and use them, as little as possible. We have massively reduced the amount of plastic we use. I think last time we measured it, it came out at less than 20% per kilo of vegetables as a supermarket. That was independently verified. So we already use very little plastic. And what we do use is, with the exception of the meat that we sell, is all home compostable. And it's about 99% derived from plants. So there is a small amount of oil-based plastic that we just couldn't get the properties that we needed in terms of permeability and with these totally cellulose-based plastics. But, so we've come to a solution which is compromised. It's by no means perfect. It does assume that everyone separates out those compostable plastics from anything that's going to be recycled, because obviously if you mix compostable plastic with plastic that's going to be recycled, you mess up, the recycling, or whatever you make in the next life of the plastic will be of very poor quality and low durability. So there are lots of nuances and complexities around it. And I suppose what we've done is maybe made the best of a bad job, as we say in England. I'm not in any way saying it's perfect or it's a good solution, but it's the best we can do at the moment. That's where we are on plastics. I mean, generally, I do feel it sounds like maybe you're going through the same thing that we went through maybe 4 years ago. It just became completely hysterical. And we have just had COP26, where it took until the last day for anyone to mention fossil fuels. It's just a bloody distraction. I mean, 90% of climate change is caused by burning fossil fuels. It's very, very simple. It's a tragedy that there's plastic in our oceans, and it's a reflection of a very poor attitude to our environment. But it's not going to destroy the planet in the same way as climate change is. The number one issue is climate change and plastics. I'm sure, Shell and BP and Mogul were absolutely delighted that everyone was all talking about plastics as if that was the main environmental issue, and they could just carry on, screwing the planet while we were all distracted by something else. So I do feel the whole plastic argument is a bit of a distraction from the main issue, i.e. burning fossil fuels.
Yeah, and it's probably a story that it's closer to the consumer and the consumer can understand it better. So it's sometimes easy to pull that up.
You can see the things, you can see it in the sea. You can see a photograph of a bird with a beer can thing around its neck, or, you can't see carbon dioxide in the air, and that's the big problem.
Yeah. Christina, shall we talk pesticides?
Yeah, another one of the hot topics we have. So what we've seen lately, well, not lately, since we started at crowd farming, is that some of our younger farmers are really committed to, for example, organic farming or avoiding any types of agrochemicals. But it's maybe the previous generations that suddenly saw this kind of magic potion that was agrochemicals. And now we're telling them that all of these things that helped their jobs for a long time, now we cannot use them and they're not good anymore. Maybe because some arguments have been repeatedly over time, that it's you need them to produce, you need them to feed the world, and some of these arguments. I know you have a strong opinion on this, and you have really good information out there about this one. Would love to hear it.
Okay, well, I'm not a diehard I'm not, a Luddite. A Luddite is someone who is, always looking backwards and romanticizing the past and views, any technical advance as being, bad. I'm not in that view. I'm not fundamentally anti, genetic engineering, for instance, and I'm not even, I wouldn't say I was fundamentally against pesticides. I just think we've been far too arrogant and haven't evaluated the risks associated with the pesticides that we use, and those risks need to be balanced against the benefits that they bring. So glyphosate is a I know it brings lots of risks with it, but it does bring. I've just been weeding this morning. I was out weeding my walnut and hazelnut trees, and I can do 30 trees an hour. With glyphosate, I would do 300. And they'd grow faster. And the result is that people would plant more trees. So trying to grow trees organically, certainly in the climate in the west of England, is hugely challenging for the first 3 years to control the weeds around them. And, for instance, low cultivation farming, which I assume is making advances in Spain in the same way as it is in the rest of the world, is very, brings huge environmental benefits, but is almost completely dependent on the use of glyphosate or similar herbicides. And whether it's better, whether it's the environmental benefits of disturbing the soil less are justified by the environmental costs of using glyphosate is a very complex argument, which I wouldn't feel qualified to answer, categorically. But I could be persuaded. I think that there are examples where, some use of pesticides is justifiable. The problem is that, we've just used them without sufficient consideration, and why they're there while they're there, and whilst they are so cheap, there isn't an incentive to try and look for more subtle and nuanced ways of controlling pests and diseases. Trying to encourage predators and so on, trying to have a diverse environment on your farm, so you don't get these massive explosions. Growing different varieties at different spacings and so on, so you don't have so much fungal disease, and all these things which people who are experienced organic farmers, normally when you start, the first few years you have all sorts of problems, and people often give up. And but as the years go by, you learn that you probably learn that there's some things you just can't grow well, and you avoid those, and you find the solutions still. So we used to regularly, I can't really think, we used to lose our cauliflowers to cabbage root fly, carrots to carrot fly. Lettuces were always covered in aphids and being rejected by the supermarkets. I mean, I can hardly remember when I last saw more than 2 or 3 aphids in a lettuce, because we've got just much better at controlling them, at encouraging the lacewings, hoverflies, and ladybirds that predate them, and so on. So whilst everyone's using so many pesticides and they're so cheap and they're so available, and every technician is telling you that's what you should do, people aren't learning the skills to manage their pests in other ways. So, I'm not going to say everyone should go organic tomorrow and abandon pesticides, but I do think a greater appreciation of where farming fits in a kind of ecological way is can solve most of the problems that we
Now that the prices are going up, at least here, maybe it's an opportunity to convince people to go into organic.
Fertilizers certainly gone up a lot in price. And I'm sure that will make people think. I think people are being much more sensible in their use of nitrogen fertilizer in the UK than they were 20 years ago. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with price.
Guy, do you think organic certification is a way forward in terms of preserving land or making a more sustainable food system? Or perhaps you're going to tell us that the organic certification is not enough and farmers should go beyond, and consumers should expect more from supermarkets, from growers?
Well, I don't think organic is a whole solution. I don't think it's the solution to every problem, and I don't think it's the only solution. However, at the moment, it's the only thing that means anything, really. I mean, in the UK, everyone's talking, and I imagine it's the same in Spain, about regenerative agriculture. And every time someone uses it, I say, what do you mean by that word? And, so for some people, it involves growing lettuces under artificial lights in a vertical building, and for other people it would mean low cultivation and using glyphosate. I mean, it covers so much that it's just meaningless, really. It's a kind of philosophical concept at the moment, which is fine if you just treat it as a philosophical concept. But if you're trying to say that there is a marketplace for regenerative agricultural produce, or that farmers can get some sort of premium for selling it, I mean, that's just a fantasy. It's not, there is no marketplace. There's no way of the food citizen, I'd rather say than consumer, but of actually conveying their choices in terms of what they want to buy back to the farmer. And that's what organic, the certification does. So, it infuriates me, really, that in the UK, organic is being sort of sidelined. And everyone's thinking regenerative is the next thing, without even knowing what regenerative is. It's just so kind of intellectually lazy. I find it very annoying. And at the moment, the only thing that means anything in the marketplace is organic certification. Certainly in the UK, there are no other. I can't think of there's free range for chickens, perhaps. I mean, some of them have their beaks cut off, so I don't know whether that, does that make you feel okay about buying a free range egg? But I mean, really, there are no other food certifications which I can think of that have any real meaning. So I think I'd say, to answer your question, I think organic certification is very, very important, and I think it deserves to be supported. I mean, can we go further than organic? Yes, we certainly can. And that may involve a lot of the things that people are kind of probably somewhere thinking about when they talk about regenerative agriculture. And the big thing is, can we produce food organically with less disturbance of the soil? I mean, that is that's the big one for me, with more perennial crops and the big, because sort of just destroying what's there, by ploughing and intensive cultivation in order to sow a new crop, which is the basis of agriculture ever since it started, and is the basis of a lot of organic agriculture as well, it's just not a sustainable solution. We've got to get beyond that. And so I do think that's the next big challenge. And it is a really big challenge for organic because we can't use glyphosate to get rid of what's there. We have traditionally relied on cultivation, and that is, do you know what I mean when I say Achilles heel? It's the big sort of weakness of organic farming, I think, is the excessive cultivation of the soil. It's something that I feel really, really strongly about. We farm in quite a high rainfall area, and we had a catastrophic soil loss incident 2 years ago, which it just broke my heart. I mean, it reduced me to tears. I'm welling up now just thinking about it. Actually, all that soil that I saw, washed off there, and that field. This winter we have planted with hazelnuts. So it will go into a perennial crop, because I don't think we can ever plough it again. I think the risks of soil loss are just too high, and that we're doing quite a lot of that sort of thing, trying to reduce the risk of soil loss, because with increasingly extreme rainfall climatic events, we can't rely on traditional agricultural practice anymore, because the risks are just too high.
So, Guy, we've talked about soil health, but I would also like to know what the evolution you've seen on the communities where you're at, where you're working, the social impact of agriculture in the whole supply chain. Like, what have you seen? What's the evolution? What should we be concerned about in the future? And what can we do as consumers and as a company that's part of this ecosystem?
And if I may add, what you've done to Riverford's ownership structure, how has that impacted communities as well? I think very, very interesting to our audience.
Well, the big, probably the biggest change in my lifetime has been the rise in scale. So, I mean, there used to probably in our village, there probably used to be 20 dairy herds, typically would be milking. When my father started milking, 20 cows. When me and my brother took over, it was 80 cows. Now it would be 400, and there are only 2 producers left, and they bought up all the land from the other ones. And the cows, which were out in the fields, and are now mostly kept indoors, fed maize silage. The people who used to drink in the pub, they've gone. Their houses have been sold to people who were from London who want to move down here. And the cows are milked by, one of them, they have 4 Poles who are flown in from Poland for 8 weeks. They milk the cows, and then they fly back and they fly another 4 in. That's contributing nothing to the social, fabric of our countryside. It's doing, the milk is of inferior quality. It has the omega-3 balance is all screwed because they don't eat grass and clover anymore. It's all to produce milk for, I don't know, 2 or 3 pence a litre cheaper. It's just, it's just all going in the wrong direction. But there's a new generation, and I'm guessing it's the same in Spain. There is a new generation of highly innovative, environmentally conscious, and probably, with a strong ethics, people entering the industry who are, give me great hope, actually. And I really hope that they can get the access to land and capital that they deserve. And I don't know what it's like in Spain, but here, everything is tipped towards scale, and that's what the government wants to see, and that's what they support. High tech scale is what they want to see. Then these sort of fringe activities are, anyway, they need support, and the only way they're getting support is from other citizens, from consumers
that are willing to pay the price.
Right? But you do need to be able to discern between what they're doing, their produce, and what their practices are, and what the mainstream is, and you need to be able to identify that in a hopefully in a kind of legally enforceable way, because there is so much bullshit out there. Greenwash. I'm sure you have, in Spain, the same thing, that people will make, great claims about how their products are made and how they're good for the environment and so on. And mostly it's just a load of, complete
You say it, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why we need, that's why we do need certification, and whether we can have certification that goes beyond organic, maybe that is what we need. Maybe we do need some sort of standards for what is, socially sustainable agriculture. I mean, Riverford has just become a B Corp a couple of years ago. Do you have that in Spain?
We do.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's quite an encouraging. We found it very useful anyway to make us look at the business in terms of not just people in the environment, but also not just the people who work for us in the environment, but the local community and health and so on as well. So trying to sort of draw all those things in and present them in a verifiable way, verified by a third party, I think is quite important. Did I answer your question? Probably much too long, I imagine.
On the contrary. Guy, I want to.
Sorry, did you want me to talk about employee ownership? Is that?
That'd be phenomenal as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're coming up for our third year, or is it fourth year, where the Riverford became employee owned. And what I mean by that is that the people who work there are now the co-owners of Riverford, own the shares, and the profits that aren't reinvested are distributed amongst the co-owners, and they have a meaningful say in the decisions that are made in their long-term future, but also in their day-to-day working conditions and so on. They decide how much I get paid and how much the managing director gets paid. But and I think, and it's just been an absolutely wonderful kind of experiment in. I've always felt that capitalism and shareholder-owned businesses are just so sort of wasteful of human capital, and that we could all do much better. That generally people have much more to contribute at work than they get the chance to. And this was a bit of an experiment to try and find if there was a better way. And I can tell you, 3 years in, it is so much better. I mean, our staff retention has doubled. People are much happier at work. They're better paid at work. I think our customers are better looked after. The co-owners are really keen that we do the right thing by the environment and our ethics. I mean, actually, I think they're actually better guardians and defenders of Riverford's values and ethics than I was, actually. It's always a bit dangerous when it comes down to just one person. So when it has to be, when that power is spread around a little bit, and especially when it's spread around amongst the people who are actually making the day-to-day decisions, it's been absolutely fantastic.
I wanted to ask you about consumer attitudes. I mean, you've been doing this for more than 30 years now. You've seen a lot, and I wanted to ask you about that consumer evolution, if you've seen any, and what do you think the future holds for organic and for direct sales as well? I mean, for example, the European Union has put in place the farm to fork strategy, so it's actively promoting it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well. It'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, well, there is a huge appetite for people to know how their food is produced and to buy food that is produced in a way which is, in England, we're particularly obsessed with animal welfare. I know it's less of a concern in Spain. So animal welfare, environmental impact, how the co-owners, staff are treated. And so all those things really, really, matter to people. But we have a system of retailing which really divorces production from retailing, and that's how the supermarkets work. They don't want you to know where it comes from, because then they won't be able to screw that producer and go on down to someone who's prepared to do it for cheaper. So we've got a whole retailing system that's based on separating those two things, when most people actually want to bring them together. They want to be closer to how their food is produced and feel that sort of trust in it. And I've, in my 30 years or 35 years now of selling direct to customers, I just think that's grown and grown and grown, and I see no sign of that changing. And as we lose faith in politicians and the media, I think for people to actually to have real life contact with how, well, probably applies to other things in their life, but I think particularly how what they put in their mouths is produced. I just can't see that being anything other than a growing issue.
Yeah, we see the pandemic has perhaps accelerated the change towards more sustainable behaviour. Like people are more worried about what comes through the doorstep.
And I think people are at least considering, living less consumptive lives. I mean, do I need to work all those hours in order to buy all that crap? I'm talking about people who are quite wealthy there, because unfortunately, the huge majority of people don't have any choices. They just have to work those hours. But I do notice that there are more and more people who do have what I would call some discretion, that they are in a position to make decisions about the lives that they lead, are choosing to lead simpler lives, and I think get more in touch. There's been a huge rise in crafts. People learning how. My 12-year-old sits there knitting every evening, and actually my older children, they all knit and make stuff and everything. I mean, my God, when I was their age, no one. As a matter of fact, I used to knit as well. I was a complete freak. There weren't many people who were doing that, believe me. But cooking is becoming, something that is, if you can cook in their age group, that's really respected. So I think these, having a bit more, self-sufficiency rather than just relying on being able to buy everything is, there are some encouraging things going on. Thank God.
Guy, you've certainly given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
And thank you to our listeners for being with us for another episode.
We hope you enjoyed this little field trip into the world of the myths surrounding the agri-food industry. See you at the next episode. Bye-bye.